A lot of concerns and frustrations in life dissolve when the idea of the self and individual is dissolved. What I am working on now is a demolition of the Western model of the individual and self. It means a demolition of the economic self, rational consumer, a demolition of the scientist, objective observer, a demolition of the individual as legally responsible in a court of law. I see selfhood and individuality as a construction supported and encouraged by the state and corporation so that a population can be economically manipulated and surveilled. What is called identity or self today is a list of marketing and census categories. The individual exists as a brand. Technologies have been created and adapted to encourage a carefully prescribed selfhood and individuality. This idea of selfhood is built upon the assumption that life is no more than what can be expressed in language and through reason, what can be turned into data and measured for mathematical equations and predictions. The current history of the West is the submission of man to an idea of himself as dictated to him by the state and corporation. He is told to fit his life into this model for his own benefit, his security, for his financial success in an economic system. The promise and hope is that man will become utterly predictable, for his own security and for the security of the state and corporation. This is part of the grander Western project of making the entirety of the universe predictable, the unification of the sciences under a single theory. It turns out, however, that predictive modeling of life is very limited in scope. At the atomic level is uncertainty, with the scientific observer affecting his own experiments. The object-subject opposition breaks down. There are similarities here to the butterfly effect you mention, which is uncertainty revealed at the most general level. What runs through both is the idea that things are linked in ways we do not understand, that seem beyond measurement. Even the link between things we cannot describe or measure accurately. The force that binds two things is a mystery, or one thing ends and another begins. Perhaps there are not two things at all. Some things exist only as symbols in a mathematical equation theorized to exist for the sake of the equation working. Perhaps the separation of things exists only in the creation of two words, or mathematical signs. Can we even accurately identify the exact border between the things where one thing becomes the other? Is that border another thing? It all finally seems arbitrary and open to never-ending interpretation at both the atomic and most general extreme. Daily life as man knows and lives it does not happen for him at either of these extremes, and where measurement and predictability does seem possible for man in the world, where his notion of selfhood and individuality does awkwardly exist, is in fact a very narrow region. This region is being ever more defined and refined by his technology, as man is being asked to live only in this region and not outside it. What has man had to give up to make himself a predictable individual, for science and economics, for the corporations and the state? Moreover, what has the world had to give up? The other animals? What have the gods and divinities had to give up in this grand project to create a predictable, secure, measurable, immortal, and everlasting truth? My argument, if I have one, is that what is unpredictable in man and in everything, what cannot be said, what cannot be measured, what cannot become the zeros and ones of internet code, exists outside language, science, technology, and to ignore it leads to man's unhappiness, his sickness, his autism, etc. My argument is that what is unpredictable is what is disruptive to science, to the state, to the corporation. It is what must be blotted out, eliminated, for a human system to function, for mathematical equations to work, for capitalism to work, etc. It is not clear at all what we are, as much being inherited from a lineage of family and surrounding culture. The ancient Greeks before Plato spoke often of gods acting through men. There was certainly not the notion of 100% responsibility for actions in a legal moral sense that we have today. This current Western notion of the self is clearly limited and defined so that the law will function, as well as economic models and capitalism. Technology allows the state and corporation to further control man by getting him to submit to a limited notion of himself, a vision of himself as a brain like computer hardware, knowledge like programmable code. He speaks of hacking the self. There are all varieties of new language metaphors based on technology being developed to encourage this vision of himself. These crude metaphors are poetry, of course, but poetry changes life and always has. and these new metaphors advance the interests of the state and corporation. It is a truism that Facebook or Instagram do not accurately represent what a person is, or that your job is not what you are. But if man no longer imagines beyond those internet account representations of himself as individual, or what his tax forms say he is occupationally, is it possible that that which is unpredictable could eventually be forgotten, lost, or eliminated? Could man one day become his technology, one day live as part of an equation? Some technological futurists see this as his liberation and immortality, an expansion of his world. I see it as a subtraction. For man would have to give up all that does not submit to computer code, that which seems to me to be most meaningful, that which cannot easily be spoken of, but that which makes him human.